Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Inclusiveship Show, the place to get practical insights to make inclusion happen in the business world. My name is Compoint. I'm your host. And today I'm absolutely delighted to be here with Matt Burns. Matt, a warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation.
It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
And could you introduce yourself to our audience, Matt?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Matthew Burns. I lead the HR team here at JYSK Canada, and recently we were recognized as having the most innovative use of HR technology in this country.
Wow, well done, well done. Regarding inclusion and diversity, Matt, how have you become involved with this topic? What's your story?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know we only have a show today, so I'll keep this answer quite brief. But what I would say is it goes back to early. So I was raised in a family where inclusion was really important. I come from a large family. I'm the oldest of 3 sons, the 12 grandchildren. I'm used to having lots of people, lots of different backgrounds around all the time. And whether it was family, friends, we always had family gatherings. So I'm used to having to collaborate and work with and partner with a lot of different people. And the reinforcement I received in my life was, I think we talked earlier, Thais, off camera, about kind of the difference between the gold platinum rule. So I was raised with the golden rule, which is treat others as if you wouldn't. I know you subscribe to the platinum rule, which is treat other people as they like to be treated. So that was something that was a lesson passed on to me very early on in my childhood. I carried that through my professional career.
And what's your killer argument to convince people about the value of inclusion and diversity, Matt? That seems so natural to you. Maybe it's less natural for other people.
Yeah, first and foremost, I don't try and convince people of the argument on diversity and inclusion. It really comes back to people's core values. And because of that, it's inherently difficult to convince people or influence people to change their perspectives. They have to really experience, feel it for themselves. But what I would offer, if somebody asks me why I believe in diversity and inclusion, it's that I believe individuals should be given an equal opportunity to have success. And then turn things over to the individual to realize their own success. So for me, I'm a big believer in enabling people to have growth in their career, growth in their personal lives. And I really want to see that in a broader context. It hurts me, it pains me when I hear stories about individuals who weren't given the same opportunity or may face some systemic barriers to success. One thing we try and do here at JYSK is remove as many of those barriers as possible so they can achieve that success in their careers.
And what's the most effective initiative that you've ever taken?
Yeah, and I think when it comes to inclusion, one that I have about this, oftentimes really over diversity and inclusion because it's a really complicated issue. And it cuts back to people's core values. Some of the most effective ways of addressing diversity and inclusion are keeping it simple. And one thing that we did at JYSK last year was I had my team go through all of our correspondence, all of our training documents, all of our materials in the business that I thought was relevant. And we removed all of the male and female pronouns from all that correspondence. So a very simple but very meaningful step that we took. And based on that, I received a lot of feedback, both internally and externally, about that effort, mostly positive, with individuals saying, thank you, words do matter, and by creating a lack of barriers or by removing barriers to language around, we create a more inclusive culture. And why I love Example so much, Thais, is it's free. It cost us the time that we spent to go through and do the review, the keyword search within our notes. We made the changes, we moved on. There was no need to develop big fancy programs, but the impact was meaningful within the organization. And secondly, we actually didn't communicate internally. So we didn't broadcast it, we didn't announce it, we just made the change. And I was surprised people actually noticed. So people recognized that we didn't have pronouns anymore. They asked some questions, and that became kind of a viral piece in the organization here.
Matt, it might be maybe obvious to you what it means to replace pronouns. Can you give us just a very concrete example of a sentence that was reviewed so that our audience can really understand what's the change?
Of course, that's a great question. So what we did essentially, in really simple terms, was anything that had he was replaced with or them. So we just weigh the male and female descriptors with respect to any of our policies, any of our programs, any of our technologies and policies. From there, we simply sort of they and them. So as an example, you could say, as a manager is attempting to drive their business, incumbent upon him or her to do step 1, step 2, and step 3. What that would look like now is, as a manager operating our business, it's incumbent upon them to do step 1, step 2, and step 3. It's a subtle change, but very meaningful for individuals who are looking to see an inclusive culture, and perhaps for those individuals that don't identify with either one of those genders.
Sounds so simple and obvious, isn't it, once you've done it? It might sound complicated. The idea of it sounds much more complicated than the actual implementation, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And I think that is a great example of something that is simple, that is inexpensive, but has really significant meaning. Whereas I've been participating in a lot of other events with other organizations back in my career, where they had big elaborate events that just didn't move the needle the same way. So the effort expended to realize there wasn't an ROI on it in the same way that this took a couple of hours, made changes, and it's had a material impact both internally, so externally with our brand as we found out we've made these changes.
And Matt, what's the most common objection you come across, and how do you respond to it?
In a diversity and inclusion context?
Exactly, always with regards to inclusion and diversity.
Yeah, I think the thing I hear most is people have objections or have misconceptions around the idea of quotas. So we hear that a lot, and we have programs internally that we attempt to remove those barriers. So we hear comments from individuals regarding, was the selection of certain leadership positions done based on merit or desire for more diverse leaders, as an example? So we approach that. We try and achieve both. We always promote or hire the most qualified candidate. What we spend our time on is removing the systemic barriers that would prevent a more diverse group from having success in that application or in that role. That's where we focus our attention. But at times, every job or every opportunity in an organization can become contentious because individuals may feel entitled to the job or feel like they're a qualified applicant. So a large portion of what we hear is, if we were to select somebody and it comes into a diversity context, we have to walk people through our methodology regarding how we blend diversity and inclusion with business performance.
And how about non-inclusive behaviors? How do you think is the best way to deal with non-inclusive behaviors?
I think in that conversation, I want to go back to my first point, which was it's really hard to change values. That being said, the organization itself also has core values. And I would say that inclusive behaviors are in complete alignment with our corporate values. So when we find examples of individuals or groups that are displaying behaviors that would be in conflict with those corporate values, we would immediately address that with a conversation and educate that individual on our expectations so far as corporate values in the context of diversity and inclusion, but also give them concrete examples of how perhaps their language or their actions may come in conflict with that. So we treat it more as an educational process. We don't tell people what they have to believe, but we tell them what's appropriate conversations and content for discussions within our culture.
Oh, that's very practical, isn't it? It's about the behaviors. It's not about the beliefs.
Well, exactly. And I think if we were to quote unquote, if we were to target individuals or we were to be more forceful in our requests for individuals, we'd actually be hypocrites. So we don't attack individuals or their behaviors or their values. What we talk about is their actions. And that's where we focus our time and our attention. So we're not saying you have to believe something specific. What we're saying is that within the context of our corporate culture, there are some actions that are inappropriate and some actions that are appropriate. And we try and illuminate each of those scenarios so that individuals can understand what we expect and then as well adapt to our corporate culture.
And what is the most common mistake to avoid in this space? Or maybe what is the mistake that you made, that our audience members could avoid on that journey?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think one mistake that I see a lot is, and I think comes from a bunch of different perspectives, but it's individuals making assumptions on the feelings and beliefs of other individuals without having a conversation. So I have a lot of dialogue where I'm bringing two parties together that may have a misalignment in terms of their views. And my job really is to surface those conversations and to allow those individuals to have a conversation. So in a lot of ways, I become a facilitator more than anything. And I think that the opportunity for individuals to dialogue and communicate provides a great chance for those individuals to gain a better understanding from each other. So when people make assumptions as to why certain comments are made or not made, I think it provides an opportunity to ask the question and to engage in that dialogue for that understanding. Otherwise, when you're making assumptions, you may be misconstruing somebody's intentions, or you may decide to avoid the topic altogether, holding on to your own beliefs. And I think that is as dangerous, and it doesn't, again, work in an inclusive culture. If someone says something to me that I don't appreciate in the context of myself or my values or my background, then I'll address the situation. But I always assume innocence. I don't assume that the comments were intended to injure or to harm, but it may be just a lack of understanding or poor choice of words. So I will engage the individual, make them aware of my concerns with the comments, and then get their alignment that going forward, that type of behavior won't be acceptable.
Can you recall any concrete situations where those assumptions played a role?
Yeah, obviously I'm not at liberty to discuss names or specifics, but what I can share with you is we did have a situation in a previous employer where we had an employee who was quite convinced that other members of their team were biased and discriminating against them on the basis of not only their gender, but also their background and country of origin. Pulled back the layers of the onion, what we found was that the individuals in the workplace were just uncomfortable because they didn't quite know how to approach the individual. And in light of that understanding, they didn't do what I mentioned previously, which was have a conversation. They just avoided the person. So that individual misconstrued avoidance with a lack of respect. So what we did in that case was just bring those parties together and say, okay, here's a concern on the table. This individual feels like you're avoiding them, and that's lack of respect. Can you provide your perspective? In that scenario, the individual actually was able to share that they were avoiding this individual, but doing so because they were afraid of insulting them or of causing this person any distress. So their reaction was to withdraw, but that exacerbated the problem. So we were able to bring those two parties together, have a great conversation, and that really did fix the relationship. I think, as I mentioned before, Thais, a lot of this comes down to conversation. It's getting the parties around the table, having a dialogue to gain understanding. The vast majority of people that I interact with on a day-to-day basis really come to work wanting to do a good job, respect the people around them, but it's that lack of understanding. People will often err on the side of caution and to withdraw, and in some cases that actually hurts the problem.
Yeah, so you must be a great mediator then, Matt.
I don't know. I think ultimately it takes the other parties in the room to participate in the conversation. So I do my best to create the conditions for success to occur. But ultimately it's incumbent upon the other individuals in the conversation. As long as they have a good faith effort to want to see a resolution, more often than not, it works out pretty well.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, having difficult conversation, I mean, even framing this as difficult conversations, I don't know if it's the best framing, but having sometimes conversations about things that touch us very, deeply can be difficult for some people. And I guess sometimes if in a team there is no trust, I think when there is trust in a team, it's easier to address more difficult issues when there is no trust.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think trust also gives people the benefit of the doubt in some cases, because again, I think more often than not, behaviors that we are positioned to me. So oftentimes when my team is involved in situations, it's after the point of local efforts have been unsuccessful. So they're asking for a third party to come in and to provide some value into that context. And more often than not, we find is, again, just a misunderstanding. And I understand it because, as you mentioned, these are really difficult conversations to have. And the majority of individuals that we work with would prefer to avoid the conflict rather than to address the situation head on. And not because of malicious intent on their part, but because they're uncomfortable or perhaps not confident in their ability to handle the outcome of the questions or outcome of the conversation. If you are unsure how to manage those situations from end to end, sometimes people may feel it's easier just simply to avoid it altogether. And what I would say to those individuals is while I understand that belief, I think it's really important to also understand that by avoiding it, you're actually taking a stand, and it may not be the stand that you want to take. So find a partner, whether it's human resources, whether it's a coach, whether it's a mentor, that can help talk you through that conversation. We spend a lot of time role-playing with our teams, providing them with feedback and providing them with best practices that we think will enable them to have those conversations. And in some cases, that does mean we sit alongside with the individual to coach them and counsel them, just to give them that extra comfort and knowing that as long as their intentions are good, that the other individual is a willing participant in the conversation. And more often than not, things go very, very well. But if they don't, then we're there to support them and help them through the situation.
And Matt, what's the best advice you've been given, to accelerate progress towards inclusion and diversity? Or maybe the best advice that you'd like to give to people in this space?
Sure. I think for me, two things. I think specific to just careers in general. So this is more of a general piece of feedback. One piece of advice that I was given very early in my career was to pursue experiences and not money and title. And I think where that ties into this conversation is experiences open up perspectives. So if you spend time working in different cultures, different countries, and with different teams, you're naturally going to get learnings about those situations. And that will help inform your activities and your interactions with other individuals from similar backgrounds in the future. So for individuals who have worked internationally, like yourself and myself, Thais, or individuals that have had exposure to cross-cultural teams, that is just so critical in terms of understanding and to build that kind of that knowledge and repository. It's almost like another tool in your toolbox as a leader. I think that is really, really important from a general sense. And then secondly, I've already referenced it, which is more specific to diversity and inclusion. It's don't make assumptions on behalf of the other individual. More often than not, it is a misunderstanding or poor choice of words or a misalignment in terms of communication styles. Sit down, have the conversation, assume innocence on both sides. The worst thing that's going to happen in that conversation is that you're going to reconfirm a bias. And at that point in time, if the individual declares their bias, then you'll be able to have vehicles with which to address that, whether that's through human resources, your leadership team, your organization, or another third party.
Yeah, no, these are great tips, Matt. And I can see one connection point between them is that in both cases, we are expanding our comfort zones, isn't it? When you are seeking different experiences, we are expanding our comfort zones, and confronting difficult situations is also about getting outside your comfort zone and getting
and
clarity.
there's no respect for practical experience. So this is one of those areas where you're not going to answer this in a textbook. You have to go through the situations yourself. You have to put yourself in positions that are uncomfortable, but you'll grow from that. So I'll give you an example. I think recently we've discussed that I'm doing an international MBA program right now. So my MBA program, I could have chosen to do a Canadian program and done my studies in Canada. I elected to do an international program, which includes students from the United States, Brazil, and Mexico, because I want an international flavor in the program. And I want to learn about the cross-cultural diversity within the Americas, so far as people on my team. And I'm so glad that I did that, because that experience for me surfaced some of the biases that I had, wasn't even aware of. And secondly, gave me an opportunity in a safe environment to ask questions, to make mistakes, with an understanding that we are all learning and we're all on equal footing. So whether you were from Canada or Brazil or the United States or Mexico, we're all kind of starting at this point. And I think, again, with the assumption that we all have the best of intentions, it created a really interesting environment, especially during today's current events of all things that are happening around the globe, a really interesting environment for learning. And ultimately, I think that's a skill that leaders today to master. We are moving to a global economy if we're not there already. The ability to manage remote and often cultural teams is absolutely critical at vast majority of large organizations, and will become commonplace in medium and small organizations. So that was a skill that I wanted to continue to refine, build, and to add more depth to, so that when that scenario presented itself, I would have that to fall back on.
And in your opinion, Matt, what's trending now in the inclusion and diversity space? What is new?
Trendy in the inclusion and diversity space. That's a very interesting question. I don't know that I would call it trendy, but one thing that I hear a lot about is empowerment. And clearly there's recently been a real force around the Me Too movement. And specifically, we get a lot of feedback in our department around the work environment that the women business are experiencing. And we in HR are in part tasked with creating a fantastic employee experience for all colleagues. And that means individuals from all genders, all backgrounds, all nationalities, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, right now, what I'm seeing most of is, conversations regarding harassment and bullying, and ensuring that we as an organization are treating those situations with the appropriate amount of urgency, the appropriate amount of professionalism, and most importantly, the appropriate amount of respect. Because ultimately in those situations, it often involves a number of parties, and we take great care and great lengths to ensure that everyone in that process feels respected and feels heard. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the outcome that you're hoping for, but I guarantee that when we work with our team, it's a function of have your opportunity to have your say. We will treat it with respect. We will treat you as an individual with respect. This is becoming a more prevalent issue in light of the recent media coverage.
It's interesting to see that those topics, maybe even a few months ago, they weren't really top of mind, as if we had already resolved those issues, as if the problem wasn't there. And with the whole Me Too movement, we realized that there's so much actually that needs to be done.
Well, and I'll be honest, I've seen the figures and I've seen facts. They disgust me. I mean, as a male in the workplace, I haven't had the exposure to that frequency and that type of behavior. I've had limited situations through my career, but nothing to the degree of the individuals in that movement. And when I think about number 1 and 2 women will experience sexual harassment in the workplace, that's a start, and that's way too big. So I agree with you. Like, not only have we addressed that issue, I think we're a long way from addressing the issue. And I'll be honest, I struggle to understand the thought process of somebody so far as thinking it's okay to treat a human being with that lack of respect. That's just not how I was raised. That's not part of my core values. And we just simply don't tolerate it. So whether it's an inappropriate comment or perhaps something more serious like actual physical contact or threats and things of that nature, we just have zero tolerance policy in this organization. And I'm proud for an organization that says that. And frankly, if we did not have that kind of policy, I wouldn't be able to work in this organization. I feel so strongly about individuals having a safe, comfortable, respectful workplace to operate in. And I don't know how you achieve that. You have a systemic challenge with a lack of respect and harassment in your workplace. So I think it's something that we need to take a lot more seriously. I think it's something that leaders need to be much more mindful of. And we can no longer make excuses or explain away the reasons why behavior is occurring. It needs to be binary. This behavior is not acceptable. There are no exceptions to that rule, and we will take serious action as individuals who display those behaviors because we value contributions of all our employees, and that includes the individuals on the receiving end of that behavior.
And Matt, do you have a favorite book or TED Talk regarding diversity and inclusion?
Honestly, I don't have a favorite. What I try and do, Thais, is I try and expose myself to lots of different pieces of content. So I will engage with individuals. And lately I've been following a lot of classes associated with the United Nations. They're doing some great work around women and female empowerment, especially in the technology sector. I try to get myself to as many different types of media as possible because I want to hear different perspectives. I think, to take this into kind of a different direction, technology has been fantastic. Technology, a lot of my career has been founded on, innovation and technology. And I think we're understanding now that technology is a double-edged sword. In this specific context, what I mean by that is right now, if you are an individual, you can completely curate all the media you see. You can choose what feeds you see, what updates you get in media, what newspaper you read, what television shows you watch, what books that you read. You can curate your life so that all of the opinions that you're exposed to reinforce your currently held beliefs. That's called customization, which sounds like a great convenience, except that through customization, you narrow your perspective and you limit the amount of other perspectives that you would hear, which prevents types of thinking. So one thing I'm very mindful of is I have a general value structure that I adhere to, but I'm very mindful to introduce new and unique elements to that value structure. I can understand what perspectives are around the issue. There's not one solution to any problem, so I like to hear individuals from different backgrounds and different perspectives and different beliefs or social beliefs, because I think it gives me an insight into kind of their way of thinking and their understanding. So I'm just cautious. I understand the value of customization. I understand the value of, again, choosing what you want to see and what you want to consume, but don't narrow your approach so much, because even the individuals that we disagree with, so individuals that would not hold the beliefs that I do, may have just as much issue with my beliefs as I do in theirs. And me curating my experience and narrowing my beliefs, more of perhaps a liberal-leaning media event, is no better than somebody who just watches Fox News all day long. So you have to be open to different perspectives. And I think from that, to answer your question around podcasts, I try and engage with a number of pieces of disparate content. So I'm getting all those different inputs so I can sift through all of it and then form my own opinions.
Wow, Matt. Yeah, you have raised such an important topic, because even, the customization you mentioned, sometimes we are curating our own content on social media, but sometimes we are not even curating anything at all. It's just the different algorithms that send us whatever we have, we have whatever type of thing we have already chosen. So more and more we have this tunnel vision of the world, and in order to get out of this tunnel vision, we have to do exactly what you described, like to intentionally seek out different sources of information. Otherwise, we miss the different perspective.
And sorry to interrupt, the key word there is intentionally, because you're right, whether it's a social media platform like Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, those algorithms are programmed in such a way that whatever content you historically consume, they're going to provide you more of that, because they view that as a convenience that users would like to have. So I think in that context, you have to be, to your point, deliberate, and you have to take the initiative to seek out different forms of content, because those systems are often not going to provide you with access to that. They're going to provide you with other information that is very closely linked to historical pieces that you would have engaged with, or comments that you would have liked, or would have been third or fourth way connections in terms of people that are in your network. So you actually have to go out and deliberately seek out different points of view, which in today's busy world means extra time. And sometimes individuals don't have that time, but I think it's so critical. If we really want to drive diversity and inclusion, the path to that is opening ourselves up to different perspectives and multiple points of view, not narrowing it on one.
Now, Matt, it's the time for my very last question to you. Do you have a favorite quote? I mean, in general, maybe, but also particularly regarding inclusion.
Yeah, I have a great quote. I want to read it here because I want to make sure that I get it absolutely right. This was sent to me recently, and I absolutely love it, because I think it just speaks to a lot of what we're talking about today and in terms of today's conversation. And it comes from T.S. Eliot, who for me is somebody that I have read a lot of his works in the past, and I certainly enjoy it. The quote is, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." Oh. I love that quote, and I think it speaks very nicely to today's conversation.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Matt, for the whole conversation and for sharing, it's like a gem, a little gem, the quote you've just shared with us.
No, I appreciate the opportunity and wish you best of luck with the success of the show.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a really insightful conversation.
Take care.
And thanks everybody for watching us. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. By the way, it would be great to get your feedback. What are the key insights for you out of this conversation? Feel free to leave your comments, to like this video if you liked it, to share it, to subscribe to my channel. And if you want to learn more about my work supporting companies on their inclusion journey, feel also free to visit my website. It is www.declicinternational.com. So www.declicinternational.com. And I hope to see you at the next episode. Until then, embrace differences and make a difference. Bye. Bye, Max.